In 1934, a schoolteacher in rural Kentucky had 32 children to feed and 14 cents in the lunch fund. She fed every single one of them, every day. By spring, the school nurse said those children had fewer sick days than any town school in the county. Number 19 on this list costs less than $1 today. Number 7 was called a waste of good food until a nutrition study reversed that entirely. Number 1 was so simple that food scientists spent decades trying to explain why it worked. These 25 secrets were not recipes. They were the arithmetic of survival. Hit subscribe. Before 1946, no federal law required a hot lunch at any rural school in America. Before the National School Lunch Act, every child who ate something warm at midday ate because one woman with a wood stove decided they would. Number 25, cornmeal mush. In 1930, cornmeal cost 2 cents a pound. 1 pound fed 20 children. The teacher stirred 1 cup into 4 cups of cold water before the pot reached heat, never into boiling water, or it seized into lumps that no spoon could rescue. Low flame, steady stirring for 15 minutes until it pulled thick from the sides. A pinch of salt. A few drops of molasses if the jar was not empty. Modern grocery stores sell the same thing in a box labeled polenta for $6. The recipe is not changed by a single ingredient. Number 24, milk toast. Stale bread was not waste. 2 days old, it held its shape better in the bowl. The teacher cut thick slices, toasted them on the flat iron surface of the stove until they browned on both sides, then heated milk with a pinch of salt and a scrape of butter until it steamed at the edge. She poured it over the bread and let it sit 2 minutes before serving. It was the meal teachers made when there was nothing left. Children who grew up on it remember the sound of milk hitting the bread. Some of them still make it when they are sick. Number 23, molasses bread. Blackstrap molasses was a byproduct of sugar refining sold for pennies because the refineries had no use for it. 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, 3/4 of a cup of blackstrap molasses, 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk, mixed, poured into a greased pan, baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes, no eggs, no butter, no yeast. Health food stores now sell blackstrap molasses for $12 a jar and call it a superfood. In 1933, teachers called it the only thing sweet enough to make the children finish their bread. Number 22, crackers and drippings. Nothing from a cast iron pan was ever poured away. Each week, the teacher strained the fat left from bacon or salt pork through a clean cloth into a clay jar and let it set firm. At lunch, she spread it over crackers the way a city kitchen spread butter. A pinch of salt on top if the drippings ran mild. 1 small jar covered a classroom. The same fat that doctors told your parents to discard in the 1970s was keeping these children warm through Kentucky winters 40 years before that. Number 21, fried cornbread cakes. Many one-room schoolhouses had no oven. There was a wood stove and a cast iron skillet and nothing else. 1 cup of dry cornmeal, half a teaspoon of salt, enough cold water to bring it to a stiff paste, not batter, paste, a spoon of lard into the hot skillet until the fat shimmered. Each portion pressed flat against the iron. 3 minutes, flip, 3 minutes more. No oven, no yeast, no waiting. The children ate in 20 minutes. Number 20, potato soup. Potatoes cost less than 1 cent a pound in the Depression years. 5 pounds fed a classroom. The teacher cubed them into cold salted water with half an onion, boiled them for 20 minutes, then mashed them roughly, not smooth, roughly leaving chunks that gave the bowl some weight. A scrape of drippings worked in while still hot. A pour of milk after the flame went out, if the tin was not empty. It was not a recipe. It was what you made when the only things left in the cellar were potatoes and an onion. Number 19, bean and ham hock soup. Ham hocks were the part of the pig the butcher could not sell to anyone else under 5 cents a pound. The teacher soaked a pound of navy beans overnight, simmered the hock in 8 cups of water for a full hour, then stripped every scrap of meat from the bone with her fingers and returned it all to the pot. Beans in. 1 onion, salt and black pepper. Another hour and a half on low heat. 1 pot fed 25 children. The butcher sold the ham hock because nobody wanted it. The teacher bought it because nobody else had figured out what it could do. Number 18, vegetable scrap broth. Each week, the teacher sent a note home, bring potato peels, carrot tops, onion skins, whatever you trim at dinner and would otherwise discard. The children arrived Monday morning with small bundles of scraps tucked in their coat pockets. Everything went into the large pot, covered twice with water, simmered with salt and a few black peppercorns for 45 minutes, then strained through cloth. Poured hot into tin cups, used to cook grains, or stretched into the base of a soup. Every child brought something. Every child ate. That was the entire economics of it. Number 17, dried split pea soup. Split peas cost 3 cents a pound and required no overnight soaking. 1 cup of green split peas, 6 cups of water, a small onion, salt, and a piece of salt pork from the first moment if the budget held any. The teacher started the pot at the beginning of the morning session. By noon, the peas had dissolved themselves into a thick, self-thickening soup without any further help. 25 minutes. 6 cents. 30 children. This was not cooking. This was calculation. Number 16. Tomato and bread soup. Canned tomatoes became affordable in rural American stores after the 1920s. 1 10-cent can thinned with 3 cups of water, brought to a boil with salt and a pinch of sugar, then stale bread torn into rough chunks dropped in. 20 minutes of slow simmering until the bread lost its shape entirely and thickened the broth from the inside. A drizzle of oil across the top if there was any. Food writers in Manhattan rediscovered it decades later, renamed it ribollita, and charged $18 a bowl. Your grandmother called it supper. Number 15, creamed turnips. Turnips grew in the worst soil on the property, which in Appalachia was most of the soil. Teachers planted them in the patch behind the schoolhouse because they required almost nothing and gave back a vegetable that could carry a whole meal. Cubed and boiled in salted water for 15 minutes until a fork passed through cleanly. Most of the water drained off. A quarter cup kept a spoon of butter or drippings, worked in hot. A small pour of milk if the tin was not bare. A rough mash leaving texture in every bite. Children who refused turnips at home ate 2 bowls at school. They never understood why. The answer was hunger and a teacher who seasoned it right. Number 14. Sweet potato and molasses. The sweet potatoes went directly into the ash bed at the base of the stove when the fire was built at dawn. 45 minutes to an hour passed while the first lessons ran. When the skin had blackened and the flesh gave under a thumb pressed through the char, they came out, split open, and received 1 spoonful of blackstrap molasses spread across the top. No pan, no grease, nothing but heat, earth, and 2 ingredients. This was a complete meal. Number 13, hominy. Indigenous communities across the American South had practiced nixtamalization for thousands of years, treating dry corn with an alkaline solution to release the niacin locked inside the grain. Without that process, pellagra tore through rural communities in the early 20th century. The teachers who soaked dried corn overnight in wood ash water, rinsed it clean, and simmered it in salted water for 3 to 4 hours until the hulls slipped off and the kernels swelled, were preventing a disease without knowing its name. Doctors in the 1920s called pellagra a mystery. The women cooking hominy in one-room schoolhouses had already solved it. They just did not know the name of what they had solved. Number 12. Mustard greens pot liquor. Southern teachers knew not to drain the pot. Collard greens or mustard greens, simmered with a piece of salt pork for an hour, produced 2 things: the cooked greens and the dark mineral-rich liquid left behind. The teacher ladled that liquid into tin mugs and the children drank it hot, tearing pieces of cornbread to dip and soak before swallowing. They were not wasting anything. They had already figured out that the water was the meal. Number 11, boiled peanuts. After George Washington Carver's agricultural campaigns from the Tuskegee Institute, beginning in the early decades of the 20th century, peanuts spread across Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas as a rotation crop that rebuilt exhausted cotton soil. Schools in the Deep South had access to raw green peanuts for almost nothing. A pound into a large pot of heavily salted water, 3 tablespoons of salt to the gallon brought to a boil, then simmered 2 to 3 hours until the shells softened and the interior reached the texture of a cooked bean. 1 pound fed 25 to 30 children. George Washington Carver published 300 uses for the peanut. The Schoolteachers of Alabama had been using number 1 for decades before he started counting. Number 10, salt pork and navy beans. Salt pork cost 6 cents a pound. Dry navy beans cost 3 cents. Together, for under 50 cents, a teacher fed 30 children a meal that held them through an afternoon of lessons. A quarter pound of salt pork diced, small and rendered in the pot until the fat ran clear soaked beans added with 8 cups of water and half an onion dropped in whole. An hour and a half on low heat, lid tilted slightly open. Food scientists have since found that slow cooking beans with salt pork produces compounds that support gut health in ways modern supplements attempt to replicate. The teachers just knew it kept children full until 3 o'clock. Number 9, bone broth, rice, neck bones, knuckle bones, 1 to 2 cents a pound because no one else was asking for them. The teacher set them in a pot with water, salt, black pepper, and half an onion before the first student arrived. 3 hours of slow heat turned the water dark and thick with collagen and marrow. She strained the broth and cooked 2 cups of white rice directly in it, the grains absorbing everything as they expanded. The rice carried depth and warmth in a way that water-cooked rice never did. The same bones that cost 2 cents at the butcher in 1934 now appear on restaurant menus at $14 under the name bone broth rice bowl. The recipe has not changed, only the price has. Number 8, fatback and cornbread. Children who walked 3 miles through January mornings in West Virginia arrived, having burned through every calorie in their bodies. They needed dense fuel, 2 cups of cornmeal, a tablespoon of salt, a tablespoon of baking powder, a cup and a half of buttermilk, 1 egg if the coop was producing. The cast iron skillet slicked with melted fatback until the grease shimmered at the surface, batter in, lid on, 20 minutes. A thin slice of fatback pressed onto each wedge until it dissolved into the grain. The fat they put on top was not indulgence. It was insulation against a January morning in West Virginia. Number 7, salt cod and potatoes. Salt cod required no refrigeration and kept for months on a shelf, preserved by salt that had drawn out every drop of moisture. By the 1930s, rural families had stopped buying it. It had become too closely associated with hardship, too tight a reminder of what they were trying to leave behind. The teachers who still used it soaked it in cold water for 24 hours, changing the water 3 times, then simmered the flaked pieces with cubed potatoes, onion, and black pepper until the two merged into a thick, naturally seasoned stew. By 1935, salt cod had become so tied to poverty that most families stopped purchasing it entirely. The teachers who still used it were feeding children one of the highest protein per dollar foods available anywhere in the country. Number 6, lentil and onion stew. Lentils needed no soaking. They required 20 minutes of heat and returned more protein per pound than ground beef at a fraction of the cost. 1 cup of brown lentils, 4 cups of water, a large onion sliced thin from the start, 2 cloves of garlic, salt, black pepper, a spoonful of apple cider vinegar stirred in at the end to lift the pot and help the body draw iron from the grain. A hard stir at the finish pressed the softened lentils against each other and thickened the stew from inside. In 1935, a teacher in rural West Virginia had 11 cents for the week's lunch fund. She chose lentils. The children ate hot food every single day that week. Number 5, oatmeal with rendered fat. Beginning in the mid-1930s, rolled oats moved through federal commodity programs into rural schools as one of the few grains the government could distribute cheaply enough to reach one-room schoolhouses. 1 cup of oats, 3 cups of water, half a teaspoon of salt, 5 minutes at a boil, and the pot was ready. The teacher put a spoonful of rendered fat, lard, drippings, whatever she had, into each bowl before the oatmeal went in. The fat dissolved into the heat and added calories without adding a single bite of volume, a distinction that mattered for children who might not eat again until the following morning. The children who ate this at 7 in the morning could concentrate through arithmetic at 2 in the afternoon. The children who did not, could not. The teacher knew which ones had eaten at home and which ones had not. She never said anything about it. Number 4, navy bean soup. Navy beans had been served at the United States Senate cafeteria every single day since the early years of the 20th century. By formal institutional tradition, rural school teachers had been cooking the same bean for decades before any senator's kitchen caught on. 1 pound of dried navy beans soaked overnight, drained, and set to cook in 8 cups of fresh water with a halved onion, salt, and a piece of salt pork if the week held any money. 2 hours on low heat, a third of the pot mashed against the side to thicken the broth, then poured into tin bowls with cornbread pressed in at the edge. The United States Senate has eaten this soup every day for over a century. Rural school teachers figured out why long before any senator did. Number 3, crackers and peanut butter. Some schoolhouses had no stove. Some had a stove but no fuel to burn in it. Commercial peanut butter had been available in American general stores since the 1920s. Saltine crackers kept for weeks without spoiling. The teacher counted before the children arrived 9 crackers per child, 1.5 tablespoons of peanut butter per child. She spread each one carefully so that no cracker received more than its share. 200 calories, 7 grams of protein, enough to carry a child through the afternoon without a single flame. 9 crackers, 1.5 tablespoons. Hunger is a math problem, and she had solved it without a stove. Number 2, dried apple and cornbread. After the fall harvest, apples were sliced thin and laid out to dry on racks above the stove, across windowsills, strung on cord through the kitchen. What dried in October was still edible in February. The teacher soaked a cup of dried apple slices in warm water for 30 minutes, then cooked them down in a small pan with a spoonful of blackstrap molasses and a pinch of cinnamon for 15 minutes into a loose, dark compote. Spooned over a wedge of hot cornbread, the soaking water poured into cups and drunk before it cooled. Nothing set aside. In Appalachian schools, this was not a dessert. It was the only sweet thing a child would taste between Monday and Friday. They ate it slowly. Number 1, the teacher's own pot. When the lunch fund ran out before the end of the month, and it ran out most months, some teachers made an explanation. Others went home the evening before and cooked from their own kitchen. The National Education Association recorded the average annual salary for a rural school teacher in 1935 as $833. They paid their own rent from it. They bought their own chalk from it. And when the fund was empty, some of them wrapped a pot in cloth to hold the heat and carried it to school the next morning without a word. A pot of bean soup, a pan of cornbread, a kettle of oatmeal. They did not write it down. There is no receipt. Her name is not in any history book. The children she fed grew up and had children of their own. They never forgot what a hot meal meant when you were not sure one was coming. That is the only record that mattered.